I make it 9:30. Welcome, Talent. We've got Talent online. I'll just go to Anika to open with karakia, please.
Morena koutou, tēnei te mihi kia koutou, tēnei ata. I te tuatahi, he mihi aroha ki ngā whānau Billings. He mate a Judy Billings I tēnei wā nō reira moi mai rā e koe kia koutou te hunga ora tēnei te mihi kia koutou. He karakia tīmatanga. Tira marama mahu te pai te whakatāhune te ngaro te whakaaio I te whenua a ko hiti a whānaki a rākau nui a tohi tai ahua huti a toku ara I te pō tihei.
Mauri ora.
Mauri ora. Kia ora. Thanks, Kat.
And here comes Councillor Skinner. As I said, you could just about time him to be right on time or 1 minute late by my watch. So welcome everybody. Just remember this meeting has been live streamed and we've got the news media in the room with us as well. With Talent being present online, I think we've got everybody here, so there's no apologies. And I'd just like to welcome Becky. Becky's here instead of Mike, because he told me yesterday he had another meeting or he was flat out this week. So we've got no apologies. Confirmation of the order of business is the same.
I agree, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note. I may have to pop out for a moment unexpectedly. So I'm being told it'll be no less than 3 minutes. So I'm expecting 5.
That'll be fine. We do have other commitments at times, and we've certainly got enough people for our quorum. So no new conflicts of interest for anyone? No. We've got nobody in public forum. Confirmation of the minutes. There's an error in the minutes for the 12th of February. Anika, you moved a number of motions that day, but your name is off the list. So we'll just make a note that we amend the minutes to.
Will be amended and apologies.
Right. So would someone like to move? Move Barry Dowler. I've got a seconder, Anika. We'll put the minutes that they're a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Now we'll go to the manager's update report. May 25. Nathan.
Yeah, through the chair. The update report is essentially a good news story. There's nothing of any substance that has gone wrong in the period. Some projects are getting close to completion, specifically the regional rising main duplication work. So sometime next week, we expect it to go live for that will increase the capacity through the system. Health and safety has been good. There's been a few minor incidences or close calls, but there's nothing of any substance. There was one act, or what would I say, one property damage that's called here, but it's when a pipe broke on the site, and it actually, the reason I raise it is not really a big deal in the context, but it actually was the reason, the similar thing with one of the contractor's pipes was the reason we had an overflow during the period. So we had one overflow during the period at the Beach Road pump station where we were testing the bypass pumping arrangement, and the discharge temporary pipe, a flexible pipe, broke, or perforated it, and then obviously it wasn't noticed immediately. There was no one on site. It was noticed quite quickly. We estimate about 35 cubic meters of wastewater went to stormwater, so it wasn't a massive overflow. But in terms of the procedural aspects, the same root cause was the same issue that we had in this property damage incident on the island, which it's hard to inspect those pipes. And I mean, we're going to have to come up with some sort of procedural mechanism of actually being able to figure out how good they are and whether they can actually continue to accept their full rated pressure, because in both instances, they essentially ruptured at lower pressures than they were designed to cope with.
There's some questions in there, and I will tell you that there was some adverse comments in the Chamber of Tasman about that leak.
Okay. Well,
so Philip, you're first, and then Kahu.
I recognise that it can be quite difficult to establish when the right pipe can burst, but what sort of distance are you needing to pipe over, and are there ways of being able to mitigate that by having like a pipe in a pipe system or drainage capacity to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, in this particular, in the overflow incident, you'd have to leave that to Brad. He's been managing that process. And on the incident on site, we often are pumping between ponds to seed algae from one pond to another or to do activities. In this instance, it was a failure that didn't cause any, there was no spillage or anything to anywhere that was going to be a problem. It would have just flowed into one of the ponds and, been contained within the facility. But the issue was more about, the risk of, that happening and somebody getting sprayed or coated with wastewater in our incident. In the incident on the site, I'll leave Brad to talk to that one in terms of that context.
Thank you, through the chair. The two incidents, same hose type. To clarify Nathan's comments, at Bell Island, we have underground pipe work which conveys this flow for most of the distance when we're pumping between ponds, and there's a short amount of flexible hose that's used between the suction of the pump, or the discharge of the pump rather, and injection into those already installed hard pipelines. It was that hose that failed. It was the connection between the pump and the hard pipeline. At Beach Road, the bypass pumping setup was temporary to allow us to complete the rising main duplication connection works. The hoses that we used were running along the shortest distance possible between suctioning from the wet well and injecting into the rising main downstream of the works. The change that we have made from there, which mitigates the risk, is moving to non-flexible PE pipes for the bulk of the discharge pipe work. They are a lot more resilient, rated to the same pressure as the flexible pipes, but they don't move as much, and so there's less likelihood of them getting worn or damaged. We still do need the flexible pipe works in the system to allow some connection between these hard pipe works and the likes of pumps and discharge points. So it mitigates the risk, but doesn't remove it entirely.
I'm not sure whether that answered your question effectively, or we try to keep them as short as we can. In this case, it was a contractor doing the work to undertake the cut-ins for the pump, the pipeline increase in capacity, and unfortunately, they had a similar issue that we had on site, during the period. In terms of the consequence was different, but the similar split in the hose occurred. So,
Carter, are you going to be able to ask your question, or are you going to have to leave?
Yeah, apologies for the theme song for Star Wars. It was a bit of an entry moment. Now, I was just looking. Have you concluded the conversation about the pipes?
Oh, you were going to ask a question?
So this is a separate subject altogether. So just going back to the health and safety incidences, there on the 5th of the 3rd, there was the report about a lady who was walking a dog in an area that she wasn't supposed to be in. Because I understand that the ability to be able to restrict access to the site is, because the site's so large, that's pretty impossible. And also you've got neighbours there as well, residents in the close vicinity. Am I to assume that the practice is to best manage it with our practices, health and safety practices, that they can expect to see people there unauthorised on site? What is it that we are able to do to mitigate the risk? I'm not too worried about a lady who's walking her dog, but the fact that it was a low visual time, and also the fact that if kids can get out there, what risk that presents.
Yeah, through the chair, we're always conscious that we have neighbours and that they have a sense of entitlement to, walking around the island, and the only way, other than paddling, is to get on there, is to go across the causeway. We could try to stop access across the causeway. It would be quite difficult because the only place to do that would be in the centre of the causeway. What we've sort of taken a different philosophy, and we've basically tried to make people aware that there might be someone there, even though we discourage people coming to the island. And then we've invested in high quality fencing for any area where we perceive there being an active risk. Like the wastewater treatment plant is completely fenced with fencing with barbed wire. The idea being that a child gets onto the island, they can't fall in a pond and drown. It's for us a critical thing. We've even spent quite a lot of money recently fencing the ponds on Best Island that are not included in the wastewater treatment plant at the present time, but they're a risk. They've been there for 40 years, but that doesn't make it any less of a risk. So we're basically looking at it from a risk perspective rather than let's just stop anybody coming in. I see the negative, if we try to just stop people, would be we create a negative aspect with our closest neighbours, the ones that we rely on most to be forgiving of us if there's anything goes wrong. That being said, I think it's a really important conversation that we should probably have about the philosophy of that. We do own the island. It is a wastewater treatment plant site. We do irrigate treated wastewater to land. There is a risk that comes along with that. So our philosophy has always been try to encourage them. If they are on the island, we discourage them going, but to encourage them to keep to the beaches around, which we wouldn't ever be putting any wastewater or any other activities on. So that's sort of the notional philosophy that we don't. I mean, this particular incident was, someone going in the morning across the causeway, and the person was on the causeway, and it's a relatively narrow, thing.
From that, I remember we discussed this a number of years ago after the incident in Gore, where the young lad drowned inside a treatment plant, and he was about a 3-year-old. So I remember we looked at that in relation to that. So we have taken steps in the past. It is a causeway, but it's a beach. So around the edge of the island, people can go on the beach because we don't own the land below that high tide mark. Simple as that. In relation to the leak, what I can say is that I understand our compliance team, and Brad, you'd probably be able to answer this, did an investigation and found no fault. So there was no prosecution because that was reported at the operations committee at Tasman District recently. So, as I understand it. So you obviously had some contact with them?
Yep, through the chair, yes. We keep in close contact with the compliance team at TDC and let them know whenever these sort of issues. We're quite proactive with that. And we provided them with full details of the incident and no further actions.
And my understanding is there was another overspill, and that was caused by infiltration from the stormwater system into the wastewater system. So that was a TDC fault because of their pipes. That be correct?
Yep, correct. There was since then there's been 2 other incidents where the inflow into the Beach Road pump station from the TDC gravity network has exceeded the capacity of the pump station. It's been quite a common issue over the last decade or so, and is the primary cause for the or primary driver behind the rise and main duplication project, which is just about completed now, and which this spill was related to. So.
Okay. Yep, that's it. If you keep going.
I'll just ask another question just about the pipe. I noticed that we're currently putting about 8,000 cubic metres of water to the Greenacres golf course.
During the season, we're giving them 8,000. Yeah.
I actually don't. I don't know. Is that pipe subterranean or is it surface? And what does that pipe actually look like? Is it like a 30 mil PE or is it a
90 mil PE?
Yeah.
Under the surface, and we across the causeway from Bell Island to Best Island, we sleeved it through a secondary pipe. So there's even if there was an issue, we'd see the telltale of leakage coming out of that pipe. So when we put that section of pipe from Bell Island to Best Island, we actually put in, I think, 6 pipes at the time to future-proof us for all of the other things we're expecting to do over the next few years. So,
yeah, because it crosses over quite a large distance.
Yeah,
I was just wondering if we've got a regime of pressure testing that particular pipe, since it's been, how old is it now, Brad? Is it?
Through the chair, the pipe that runs effectively under the causeway is brand new.
Yeah,
a year old.
That was last year.
Last year and a half.
PE pipe, we expect that to last 80 to 100 years with no issues. It is as Mr. Clark pointed out, it is sleeved through another duct. So if there's any leakage under the estuary, that's conveyed to two manholes on either side, and we can actually.
Yeah. So do we have a pressure through the chair? I guess do we have a regime of pressure testing that pipe? Is it done on a cycle basis? Or?
Not particularly frequently on that style of pipe. They are extremely durable. We monitor the pressure in the pipeline for leaks, but we wouldn't necessarily go and pressure test that on any regular basis.
All right, we'll carry on.
Yep. In terms of discharge compliance and of our treatment, there's been no adverse or incidences during the period. We haven't had any excessive discharge quantities either. In terms of operations, there were no odour complaints. As I said, there was a wastewater overflow, which we've talked to. We've discharged around 46,000 cubic metres of treated wastewater to land during the season, so for irrigation on Bell Island, for helping the plants grow. We used about 18 or 19,000 cubic metres of wastewater, treated high quality wastewater for all of our on-site uses to reduce water consumption. And as you pointed out, we've seen about 8,000 cubic metres over to Greenacres for their irrigation. So overall, our reuse activities are going well. Interestingly, those sound like really big numbers, but they equate to around 3 days of our wastewater flow. So, we're really proud of them, but there's a long way to go yet before we're actually to material amounts of water reuse. So, in terms of the compliance with our trade waste agreements, one of the things that Te Mata Arawai has required and is reporting on compliance with certain activities, and this is something that we previously haven't raised or talked about. So we've been reviewing all of the trade waste discharge agreements. So NRSBU only accepts waste from people with trade waste agreements. All of our customers, Nelson City Council, Tasman District Council, Alliance and NPI have a trade waste agreement with us, and we can assess them against that agreement to say, do you comply with what the terms of your agreement were? During the period, there has been 3 breaches of the short-term peaking factor on the flow and 4 breaches of the suspended solids parameters. And we're writing to the customers to talk to them about that. None of those breaches have been significant or sufficient to cause an adverse effect on the treatment plant at the present time. So we haven't been applying penalties, but as we move forward, we'll need to be more diligent in advising of those breaches and then advising of what the remedies are, because we'll be required to report that to Te Mata Arawai on an annual basis. So there's one conversation that will occur around the suspended solids limits with one of the customers. Whether or not that results in them having to take on more capacity, that's something we'll get to at the end of it. So, any questions about that? Yeah.
Anika, you've got a question?
Yeah, I guess it's just around accountability and the role of council for compliance versus Te Mata Arawai and how that works. So if you've got a customer who's a repeat offender, what's our process? So you're saying that it's probably there's a threshold there that you're not concerned about. Is that right?
Yeah. So we essentially in RSBU has a contract, and this is a contract between 2 parties. We have a contract with our customers, and the contract has certain terms and conditions in it. It includes penalties and remedies, and our generic philosophy has been that up till today, and I don't see that changing, is that if you breach by a small amount and it creates no harm, then there's no real damage done, and we shouldn't necessarily penalise you. What we do need to do, though, is to essentially to note that down, so that essentially the warning system might be put in place, because if we never actually note it down and we never actually follow a process, then if there's some big event, then we can only still apply the least penalty of that contract. So if we note it down and then we start, basically informing the contract, the other party that there is a breach, we're not, in this particular case, we're not going to do anything about it. but there's a third or a fourth one, we can then start to apply larger penalties that might encourage them to do something different. So it's just a change in the operating philosophy slightly. Yeah.
Okay, because we don't have access or visibility over those specifics. So I guess it's just getting that assurance from, SBU that we're managing it accordingly.
Yeah. So, and one of the reasons it's interesting and it's important is the way that the system has been run and still runs is it has this notion of a club. So the three industries were in, they have their own capacity, but if one of them's down and the other one's up, then this one might have breached the rules, but because the other one's all down, it's created no adverse effects. So we've worked on this idea of a club so that the treatment plant has a capacity that can accommodate that. There's no adverse effect, so no harm, no foul, right? And the same has occurred in the past with the two council customers, where they've essentially been trying to work as a club as well. It's more difficult for them because they're obviously large discharges of, in terms of flow.
Yeah, and I guess it's just to understand when we say breach, if there's a concern or not. If there isn't, from your perspective, then
if it caused us cost or caused us a non-compliance, then we would be applying penalties, or at least having serious conversations.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Talent's got his hand up. Talent, good morning. You've got a question.
Good morning, Kiara. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Yes, fine.
I have a quick question on the trade waste agreements and the breaches. These breaches, have they been identified by our customers through their internal testing, or they have been identified by the business unit or their contracted teams? So if they have been identified by us, then where is their internal controls? So we have to take this up with the customers as well. And the other thing is it's good to have some target values and the current values so that we know that what's the magnitude of the breach. Thanks.
Through
Brad talk to this one.
through the chair, the flows and loads the contributors discharge to the scheme, so the parameters that form part of the trade waste agreement are monitored by NRSBU as part of the trade waste agreement. For clarity, the breaches of contracted flows and capacities and loads we're talking about here are relatively minor. The customers are advised of these as we go, but as Mr. Clark pointed out, there's been no impact from these breaches as such. It's very difficult for any of the customers to actually be able to monitor a lot of these parameters. Flow is one that they, is a live parameter that's able to be seen, but there's not much they can do about that. The other parameters, for example, BOD, COD, suspended solids, they all require tests that take a number of days to perform. And so the data actually isn't live on those. So there is no real way at present for the customers to be able to monitor their performance against those parameters on a live basis. Their reaction to those sorts of exceedances is very much considering their network and if there's any industries within their network that they monitor themselves. So they will have trade waste agreements with contributing industries to their own networks and ensuring that they're complying with their limitations.
It's through the chair, the monitoring, I think we need to reiterate, the monitoring of these facilities is done by NRSBU. So we wouldn't expect to duplicate all that monitoring on behalf of the customer, because it would, essentially be a secondary amount of money. We have a particular way where we monitor and we take samples on a regular basis, but we have 4 days, random days of a month that are used as our charging days. And a lot of these events would be related to those 4 charging days rather than random sampling. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep going.
Okay. In terms of the projects on the biggest single, good news story is we're getting really close to the end of the upgrade of the and duplication of the rising main. as I said before, hopefully sometime next week that'll be alive, and we'll then be able to significantly increase capacity. At which point, those issues that Kit talked about with TDCs, overflows and stormwater, and where there's a lot of stormwater would cease. And what that does raise is an issue where going forward, there is a risk that the capacity of the scheme will be exceeded, specifically in terms of future developments within the region, and that's something we need to work with particularly with Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council to resolve. We ask the councils each year to project forward what their required flows are, also their loads, but principally their flows. And we try to then look to plan for that growth in the capacity over time. And at the present time, there are some concerns that even though we've duplicated the rising main to give us more capacity, that may not have sufficient capacity into the future, and we may have to do further work, which is talked about in here.
Yep. So this particular paragraph, as soon as it had money in it at that amount, caused me an alarm, because I've been involved in budgets at TDC this year, and it's been the most difficult of any year that I've been on council in terms of trying to do an annual plan. Would you agree, Councillor Downs? But just we found ourselves in a hole, and if you look at the rate rise that we put out to our district, it's 8.8%. So it's pretty tough, especially in these times. So this caused me some concern. So I went and had a little meeting with Mike Schroer, Becky, yesterday, and then he came back to me afterwards, and he is of the view that what he has given you at this point is not in concrete, because he may look at other ways of reducing what we send, particularly because of the increase residential population going forward, one in Richmond, but two in Brightwater and Wakefield, because there's been plan changes approved in both those areas that will increase capacity. So watch this space would be a comment that I got certainly from the TDC, but they do need to keep us informed. Alan, I know that you've got a plan change in terms of Nelson City, which is increasing your number of residents as well, isn't it?
So through the chair, yes, that's plan change 29, and I don't know where that is at this moment in time. This still has to come back to council. But what I can say is probably more on the lines of what Mr. Schroer indicated to you, that when we're looking at upgrading our pump stations, we are looking at putting substantial buffering capacity and storage on our pump stations when we upgrade to allow us the ability to, number one, store during the peaks, and to allow an attenuation as we send it through to Bell Island. So that is part of our thinking. So I guess that's along what Mike indicated to you. But you're right. I think nothing's formalised yet. We still have to work through our long-term plans, the next round of the AMPs. And yes, whenever there's talk of money and budgets, it is a concern, but I think we just need to be calm about it. We just need to work through the process, get the data that everybody needs that Nathan needs from TDC and NCC, and then figure out what we need to do. So it's a process, and Nathan's done the right thing. He's giving you a heads up in terms of the potential, and that's exactly what you need to hear. But I think we just need to treat this like anything and just take baby steps and look at what that means overall. But certainly it's not only TDC that are looking at budgets. I think everybody's looking at budgets, and it's the forefront of everybody's mind. So be rest assured, yes.
Through the chair, NRSBU is essentially subservient in some way to its customers. We provide a service. We ask our customers to project forward what that service needs to be, and then we provide assets to deliver that service. We need time in order to plan to put additional assets in if they are required. There is a question and a philosophical question here about levels of service. So we act within a trade waste agreement that says we will collect and convey a certain amount of wastewater from our customers, and those customers tell us what that is. And if we have that agreement, then we need to have that capacity. Our customers have the opportunity to tell us and to take risk on whether or not they want to to supply that number for a 50-year horizon event or a 20-year horizon event or a 10 or whatever that number is. They can choose to contract a certain flow. So it's up to them to define what their level of service might be. Whereas the NRSBU's perspective has always been that we are contracted to provide a service which is nominated, it's a flow, and therefore we need to provide that amount. And it leads back to the discussion with Brad earlier and regarding the overflow at the Beach Road pump station. Notionally, there's been 3 overflows in that vicinity in recent times. Only one of those has been related to NRSBU. And the reason is that 2 of them have been outside of the level of service that NRSBU has provided or provides for. We don't contract to take more than a certain amount of flow. So if more than that amount of flow comes to that facility, the responsibility lies with the supplier or the customer. If the amount of flow that comes to that facility is below that contracted level, then the responsibility would lie with NRSBU. We have to provide that level of service that we've contracted. So it's important to understand that distinction because it does potentially change the volume of wastewater that would be contracted depending on the level of service that the customer wishes to engage us to have. It's just to clarify that position.
The key outcome I get out of this is we need to work, as NRSBU needs to work closely with the 2 councils,
Absolutely.
and which we do, but we need to do that going forward because it's
Absolutely.
whatever happens takes time, increased capacity. And if I look at what I'm seeing on subdivisions lately, I've just looked at a subdivision in Mapua that had the holding pumps in there, so that the movement of waste is at a different time of the day, and the new subdivision off Beach Road is the same. So there are 2 ones outside of Berryfields that have now got these holding pumps that are not cheap, but they change how waste is treated and moved considerably. Yeah. So there's 2 new subdivisions, one at Mapua, one in Beach Road outside of Berryfields that it's changing. They are not cheap, but they do change how your wastewater moves. Carry on.
So the other risk that we've talked to here is and which is something we're trying to act on, is and prepare for is the discharge capacity from Bell Island. So as you know, that was over the last few years, we had 3 occasions where we've had to discharge in excess of the maximum limit of the discharge. And so we're trying to work with the consenting team to understand how to apply for a variation to that consent that allows us, in unusual circumstances, to be able to essentially exceed that consent. So it's ongoing. During the period, we also, in conjunction with KIT, we responded to a consultation information regarding from Tamata Arawai. And one of the resolutions in this is to get retrospective approval for doing that. KIT asked us to support a response basically outlining the concerns we had about the new national standards, which we've done, and it's included in the back of this document. We were principally concerned that the idea of the national standards was to reduce the cost of consenting for wastewater treatment plants, save us a few $1 million in cost of consenting. But our assessment of the outcome is that, well, it might save us some money on consenting, but it will cost us tens of millions of dollars in upgrade costs, and it will cost us potentially millions of dollars a year to operate a much more complex and more, higher spec plant to meet those new standards. So we think that they missed the mark, and we're concerned about that. And hence, there's a bunch of other stuff talked about in the response, and things like we're worried that all the work we've done with our iwi partners in the region sort of gets lost because these national standards essentially are a permitted activity for doing certain things that don't necessarily align with what our overarching direction has been in the past. So there's a bunch of stuff we're keen to seek retrospective approval for that as part of the resolutions in this meeting.
So there was a timing issue as well. It had to be in by a certain date.
Yeah.
And I know two of our customers I think have done one. I know TDC has done one in relation to this, but I have a greater concern than this, because one, there's a perverse outcome possibly that you could send untreated waste well out to sea by a very expensive pipe, and then you're actually sending untreated waste to sea like used to happen in the 1960s, which I don't think is a good idea. And two is the cost to New Zealand from this replicated right around the country. And I've asked the Mayor of Tasman to send a letter to Minister Bishop, and I think we should send a letter to Minister Bishop about the possible adverse effects and the cost to New Zealand as a whole, because we're not a big country, and wastewater is on an average 3 times as expensive to deal with than drinking water. So you guys might like to comment on that, but I just think Te Mana Arawai do not understand the implications for ratepayers and industry in New Zealand in relation to these standards. Philip, you've got a comment.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know how many other councils end up discharging into estuaries around New Zealand, and are they kind of
there's quite a few that are in similar situation to us. You know, Marlborough as an example, a very similar situation to us. Probably Christchurch, has some sort of similarity to us as well. So there's quite a few that discharge. I mean, they don't necessarily do it the same way. I think Marlborough do it very similar to us, where they discharge only on the outgoing tide. Whether their estuarine environment's the same as ours, I can't tell you. It's not something I know, but I mean, the Waimea estuary does discharge essentially, pretty much fully on their discharge each tidal cycle. And so we only discharge for 3 hours, so it still has another hour of flushing before to get out into Tasman Bay. The thing that concerns me about it is that, we can always, you can do anything you want with money, right? So we can upgrade the treatment plant. We could change the discharge location. There's a bunch of stuff we could do to meet standards or to change it. But, notionally, the monetary best outcome would be to put a long pipe in and discharge untreated stuff. Monetarily, that would be the way, because it's cheap to run. We never pay for it for the next 100 years because that pipe's going to last for a very long time. But it's not the outcome that I think that anybody has been aiming for. It's a perverse outcome of the arrangements they're doing. So hence that we felt it necessary. The other thing that's been difficult in here was that the discharge to land standards that they are talking about didn't consider deficit irrigation. So you put wastewater on there, that's the amount of wastewater that the plants can use, and it doesn't go down into the groundwater. So it basically limits the land that you can apply to under the standards to only land that doesn't have groundwater close to the surface. And that actually takes out a lot of land in our region that we could put wastewater to. We can still put it on without harm to the surface layers so the plants can use it. But in this case, they basically only considered it as a disposal unit. So you're putting water on to the extent that it goes down, and therefore it's sort of the standards don't work. So there's a bunch of issues inside the standards that we weren't comfortable with, and we would recommend you read them, and and we can further conversation is welcomed.
Anita.
Oh, kia ora. I guess I've got a few thoughts flying around, and just to acknowledge the balancing of cost versus best practice. I wonder what the rationale is from a iwi Māori perspective, and if at that national level they've done their due diligence around working or having I'd imagine they'd have a working group with iwi Māori around developing these standards. So I'd be quite keen to understand that. And also, this is sort of stuff I think we're going to catch up, Brad, just around the consenting and how this impacts iwi. In terms of the work that we've done already around, the regional philosophy, the thinking is that, that it's high level enough for it not to be impacted by legislative changes. But I just want to pick your brain around your concerns there.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it would not be impacted. If these standards come in and say certain things that essentially you can only do it under these circumstances, but our philosophy says that we encourage that, and it basically excludes a lot of, let's say, land that we can put wastewater to, then it influences the philosophy, because it basically adds more constraints in order to move towards the outcomes that we as a region have been looking for.
Yeah.
So there are definitely implications that we need to consider as we go forward.
And our part would be adaptive in the way that we develop it.
We certainly, the NRSBU's stated goals have been to move in a similar direction to the philosophy. So there's no adverse thing there, but these could move us, for other reasons, could try to push us in a different direction.
Limitations. Okay. So I think just that work with iwi, there's a little bit of work there in terms of reporting back on this and their I guess their thoughts around how we deal with this. So
I think it's also important to recognise that this was a consultation document. It doesn't necessarily have all the technical information, and everything wasn't all put out at the same time. And it was actually quite hard to dig to find all the stuff when we were doing this. So it is possible that our interpretation of some of these things might be incorrect. I mean, we're asking questions to try to get the government to correct them if they are incorrect. But, that's part of the reason we've submitted to try to understand actually what it means. Yeah.
And is that consultation just with councils at this stage? Do you know, or is it going out?
It was public. Yeah, it was public. Yeah.
Thanks.
I've got two more people with questions. I've got Kahu first and then Tim.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. I think that Anika raises a really good point. And I think that it comes down to, the Three Waters is almost a distant memory now. But the current government has, in its policies, I think it would be wrong to assume that there has been iwi consultation in terms of the development of this here. They haven't done it with anything else, and essentially most of the legislation implemented has removed iwi's contribution from the decision-making table and or is a mechanism to do so. And that's an established fact, really, where we're at the moment. So I wouldn't expect anything less from this, but I would want to try and think of this in an objective point of view. The first question is, how do these new standards, and let's ignore the costs and the, so we're really thinking about outcomes. How do those new standards compare in terms of actual discharge? Because the general public out there, they just want to know what's coming out of the pipe and to make sure that it's safe for their environment, their kids and their communities.
So through the chair, the standards, they're different for different discharge environments. It's essentially the philosophy that the government has taken on in this, so they've said where there's low dilution, the standards should be very high for discharge to water. Or where there is a very high dilution, the standards can be very low. So essentially what they're saying is if you've got a river and you're discharging to a small river, you need to be very, very high standard because otherwise you would be adversely affecting the river. Mm. If you are discharging to the deep ocean, you don't need to do very much because there's a very high dilution factor and it won't create, in their mind, adverse effects. And there's a rational set of thoughts around that.
The dilution is the solution.
That's essentially what they're talking to. For us, and we've been much more subjective about it. It's about our NRSBU activity, not about necessarily about we've thought to other people's activities as well. But for us, scientifically, we have been discharging to the estuary on the outgoing tide for 40 years. Scientifically, we can't see adverse effects of that discharge, right? Mm. So why would changing the standards, because we discharge from estuary, therefore the standards are these standards.
Are you saying if it ain't broke,
don't fix it?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's the best outcome culturally. I agree with that, and we've got a plan to try to mitigate that and to do other things. But at the moment, if we followed this SEER standards, NRSBU would have to upgrade significantly the treatment plant. And in theory, we could discharge the estuary all the time rather than only on the discharge on the outgoing tide, which we see as a perverse outcome.
This is really such a significant matter for the region. I mean, this is going to, if the projections are that it's going to cost significant amounts, and this is the type of matter that we really need to bring to our joint committee, our joint council. And the individual councils should have this on a priority for discussion. That's right up front.
So 8.6 clause was me wanting to understand how we bring this to a bigger discussion.
Yep.
I think it's necessary for us to see whether there are ways of us creating synergy across the region for doing activities in the way that, and if national standards goes in, there might be opportunities as well as disadvantages.
And I guess instead of just simply assuming that the modelers of this program, that they have exercised the best due diligence and really good decision making contributions to this, we can probably front foot this and say and give our feedback early on in the process prior to it becoming entrenched. Because it's pretty hard to dig that.
My understanding is there were a lot of submissions.
Okay,
so I hope that will slow the process down somewhat.
There were lots of submissions for other parliamentary bills too. I might point out that were completely ignored. So
the difference is this is not Parliament.
This is Tamata ROI.
This is Tamata ROI.
It's the regulator.
So it's a regulator, not the government. So the regulator, in theory, is independent of the government. And they're a bureaucratic organisation.
Yeah.
And in terms of drinking water, we haven't been that successful.
I can't imagine that an organisation like that wouldn't have some level of influence from central government to their decision-making processes in relation to them continuing to receive funding to
that's
exist.
Why last week, as part of the concerns that I had at Tasman District, I talked to the staff to arrange a letter from our mayor to one of the ministers.
Yeah.
To Minister Bishop, actually.
And both of our mayors should be taking that action.
It's for Nelson City to decide, not for us. But you gentlemen from Nelson City can make that decision.
So I think that through the chair, Nathan really answered probably the second question in what you had. That was that cost side. What are the actual improvements that our region, could benefit from this just from an objective point of view, not considering the cost. So we're thinking about what is the best for our environment.
Yeah,
and does this deliver on that?
I think that if we were to spend the many millions and upgrade to that standard that they require for destroying discharge and still discharge on the outgoing tide, there would be a benefit. It would be marginal. I don't think it would be worth the money we're spending to do so. There's a bigger question to say, is there other things that we could do that if these standards came in, that we should then to collectively consider that might get better outcomes for everybody? And I don't know what those are at the moment. Those are things that we should be having a cross-boundary conversation with the NCC, TDC and ourselves about, to see whether that does occur so that we can see what the future might hold.
Tim had a question.
Thanks, Nathan. You're referring to the report to can understand. What is that Becker report? Is it the?
No. There's on the back of the agenda. There's responses from what our responses were to that. But in terms of the report,
for a report for us to look at in detail for ourselves, what have we got that on file?
I can send through the details of the consultation document. I think we can probably still find it. It may.
Was in regards to the report, and like you're explaining well in regards to how it's been interpreted by TRI.
Yeah, so there was a consultation document set out, and then that consultation document was relatively narrow in its scope, but it had a lot of technical documents that were sitting inside the ministry, the different areas of that you had to go and find to actually get the information to try to interpret what that consultation document said, and so hence my concern that we may not have interpreted it well because we may not have found every document that that was inside those other places, and it wasn't all contained in one document that came to us.
If it's easy enough to put a link to that or direct me where to read what I can of that. Cheers, I see it on the Taumata ROI page. It's got a Becker report on the recycling of water, and it has a reference to Bell Island, etc. on that, so I'm going to read through that, but that'd be another document.
No, that was a separate discussion. That was about water reuse rather than about the national standards. Yeah.
Cool. But no, that'd be important. Because it seemed not a moving feast, but there's often a lot of misunderstandings of it when it comes to the media or to public, and we could have a good nosy through. Thank you.
In terms of finance, the trend is largely as it has been for the year. We're behind budget. It stems from the fixed contribution being behind budget for the year that started out in the first quarter and will continue. Our variable contributions are going back in the right direction. So last quarter we were 450 under budget, and this quarter we're 414 under budget. So we're moving in the correct direction. I still expect or forecast that we'll be under budget at the end of the year on the variable. So there will be a wash up additional invoice sent to our customers to balance that. In terms of costs, we're within 0.5% of operating maintenance costs overall. So cost controls are pretty good. So we're pretty happy in that regard. So essentially the biggest issue there is the fact that we haven't had the revenue, particularly at the start of the year. Otherwise, it's there's other than that, the finances and that one overflow. Good news is that we've got that regional rising main is coming on soon, and will hopefully reduce any further overflows from stormwater at TDC. Open to further questions or comments.
Any questions of the manager or in relation to the finance of Andrew? What I will note is we've had more rain in the last month, so that means we probably have more inflow. So we're starting to collect a bit more money.
Yep.
Which is what happens at the beginning of autumn. So because I know we had 50 mils at Richmond in 2 days, and we had a considerable amount of other rain recently. So Andrew, anything? I didn't think there was any surprises because you've signalled it right through the year, and I'm sure Phil in the industries has seen it as well. So, any other questions of the manager? I'm conscious of time because my next meeting is 11 o'clock, and it's not here; it's in Richmond. Great, isn't it? Especially with our traffic congestion. Although it was better this morning. So. In terms of a letter to Mr. Bishop, do we possibly wait until we see what sort of response we get, or we could? I certainly have a concern with the way what they put, because what the manager has said is that could be perverse outcomes from this, which is a concern, and the other is the additional cost. I'm not sure.
So through the chair, I think if we wait for feedback, you could be waiting a long time. I don't know how long, if we work through all these submissions and get a thing back. If Mayor Tim is writing something, then I will link Mayor Nick with Mayor Tim.
Yeah.
They can have a chat, and then I don't think we should wait. So I'll follow that.
Yeah. Well, I'm aware that Mayor Tim I arranged that last week for him to write. And if you can contact your mayor, I think they've got more pull than I have. Certainly because they know the minister reasonably well, and the minister does come to our district. I'm talking Minister Bishop on a pretty regular basis. We see him. We did see him at the dam opening recently, and then he had meetings with Tim straight after. So, is there anything else? No. No more questions? No. Is someone willing to move the motion? Councillor Skinner, seconded. Councillor Dower. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. I think that's all the business we have today. So, Anika, would you like to close with Karakia? And we're just under an hour, so it's not bad.
Very good. O tēnei te mahi kia koutou anō kia koe te tia mana cat. Nei rā te mahi, mo te huinga nei, he karakia whakamutunga mō mātou. Unu hea ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia māma, tēnā koutou tinana, wairoa i te ara takata, koe rai rongo whakairi ake ki ronga kia tīna.
Tīna.
Koe
Bye.
kia ora koutou.
Thank you, everybody. And Philip, if I could see you for